Behold, our cantus firmus, along with our second species counterpoint. And now, our exciting conclusion of this three-part series with your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
Happy New Year, Matt.
Happy New Year, Jeremy.
Happy New Year, musicians, one and all across the world. We're back.
We are.
And this episode, Counterpoint Part 3, is actually been a long time coming at this point, but it might be that we built it up a little bit too much. But
yeah, kind of ratcheted up the suspense more than necessary, but
we hope not to disappoint, but we submit for you
our completion, our completion of our discussion of Counterpoint.
Our old friend Counterpoint.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll wait till the end of the episode to give our feelings on Counterpoint.
Outtakes.
Yeah. It's been a fun process.
It has. So just to recap, we talked about the cantus firmus, which is the the sort of fixed melody onto which you write a counterpoint melody in counterpoint, a counter melody, right? We talked about that. And then we started talking about species counterpoint, which is this kind of, I like to think of it as a sort of laboratory in which you are learning how these notes go together and experimenting with how these notes are put together. You know, it's not real music. It's more like music theory exercises. It's more like this laboratory-like setting. Mm-hmm. And it's all about kind of the ratios, right? So in first species, it was a 1-to-1 ratio. So for each note of our cantus firmus, we added one note of a counter melody, right? Second species was a 2-to-1 ratio. So for every one note of our cantus firmus, we added 2 notes of melody.
Oh, and the intro music you were hearing is just a recap of our second species counterpoint.
Yeah, see, there you go.
Beautiful.
Yes, yeah, we're pretty proud of it. And so now, and we should probably mention in the website that our cantus firmus was in half notes.
Yes, for episode 1 and 2, we actually brought with the cantus firmus that you're gonna, when you see the notation, the cantus firmus is in half notes, 2 half notes per measure.
Yeah.
But this time around, for this episode, part 3, we're going to actually make the cantus firmus in all whole notes.
Right, yeah. And it's just so we can use quarter notes instead of eighth notes. What's important is the ratio.
Okay, yeah, that's the main thing.
Still, they actually call that rhythmic diminution.
Oh.
In the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Rhythmic diminution went the other way, typically, though. You started off with the big ones and went down to the small ones. Mm-hmm. But it was a thing. Anyway... we digress. So that brings us to third species, which is 4 notes against 1 note of counterpoint. All right, so this is going to look a lot like 4/4 time, which is kind of why we're using quarter notes, right?
Keep it relatable.
Right, yeah. So beats 1 and 3 tend to be stressed beats. Beats 2 and 4 tend to be unstressed beats. Just like in second species, we can use a little bit of dissonance so long as we use it properly. And by properly, we're talking about passing tones, which is a dissonance that is passing between 2 consonances, either sort of filling a run up the interval of a third or the run up an interval of a fifth, And
these are typically non-chord tones, right?
Non-chord tones. See our episode there on non-chord tones.
Fantastic.
Passing tones or neighbor tones, which is a consonant and one note moves by step, either up or down, away, and then moves immediately back. Just goes to visit its neighbor for a minute, hence the term.
Returns home.
Neighbor tones, right? Yeah. So we can use those as dissonances, right? The first note of every measure must be consonant.
And just to clarify, this is the first time we're actually introducing dissonances, right?
No, second species was.
What was second species dissonance?
Passing tones and neighbor tones.
Okay, they were both. Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
We're just doing the Quarter notes.
With 4 notes. Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
God, I'm having a hard time absorbing this. Go on, I'm sorry.
So, the first two notes of every measure, the one that moves at the same time that the cantus firmus is going to be moving, right? Basically the downbeat of every measure if you were in 4/4 time.
The first of the 4 quarter notes.
Yes, the first must be consonant with the note of that cantus firmus. Absolutely must be.
And by consonant, we're talking a fifth or an octave.
Fifth, octave, third, or sixth.
Oh, it can be a third or sixth.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And frequently is. Oh my God. Please don't take my thirds and sixes away from me. I'll never be able to write counterpoint.
They're kind of the fail safe, right?
Yeah, they really kind of are. The remaining 3 notes can be either consonant or dissonant, regardless of really beat stress, regardless of what order they came in. But keep in mind the kind of dissonances that are allowed, which are passing tones and neighbor tones.
Right.
You know, don't give us any unresolved dissonances.
Mm-hmm.
Please, here's something that might be hard to notice to begin with, but first of all, parallel octaves, parallel unisons, parallel fifths, continue to avoid those.
Continue, yes.
But in addition to continuing to avoid them in the one note after the next fashion, you know, also avoid all of those parallelisms from measure one, from the first beat of one measure into the first beat of the next measure.
And that's one thing I was not taking into account when writing my, as you're going to find out, third species counterpoint. That's, in retrospect, I kind of wish I had actually just, knowing that now, I would have just written 1 quarter note. I would have gone measure by measure of the cantus firmus and written 1 quarter note at the top, moved on, and then come back and fill it out.
Yeah.
Taking those considerations to the movements from the parallel octaves and fifths.
That would have been that's a good idea to try to do that way, especially if you already have a halfway decent second species counterpoint exercise, you know, or even a halfway decent first counterpoint species, even a halfway decent first species exercise.
Yeah,
you could do it that way, and that might be a good thing to keep in mind.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I make these mistakes so we can all learn from them. Okay, well, tell me something else cool about third species counterpoint.
It is kind of fun in third species that you can begin with a quarter note rest. It's just a way of giving, you know, your counter melody a little bit of distinctiveness, and that's one less thing that can go wrong, right?
Right. And I took full advantage of that. But also knowing that in our laboratory setting, that is the only empty space, right, that we're going to be doing for this third species.
Right.
Everything else is 4 quarter notes per measure, boom, 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 across the board.
Right, yeah. A couple of other little things. Stay within a triad for a whole measure. So don't, within the space of 4 notes, don't go beyond the space, the length of a triad.
Okay.
Yeah, and and don't ever outline a 6/4 chord between these two voices. Which, if you consider perfect fourths as a dissonance, and you should right now, you will be less inclined to do that.
Right, a 6/4 shouldn't really appear anyways.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's got that fourth in it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on then. Oh,
all right.
That's it, huh?
Yeah.
So that's all the considerations that we need to take into account for third species counterpoint, right?
The big ones.
The big ones.
Now, you know, there's a lot of things that have to do with writing good lines, you know, and making lines that are the most counterpoint-like that you can make. Those are a good little collection of the really, really big rules, you know, the ones that'll get you marked off the most. You know, depending on how hardcore your professor is, you know, he may have a list of rules as long as your arm for all of these. You know, but if you abide by these and also try to do these fairly melodically, you'll do all right.
Well, ding, 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 ding.
You want to hear this third species?
I think so.
All right.
Now, what else can I say before I start this off? So I've been putting this off for a while.
Yep.
And
this is Jeremy's homework, by the way.
This is my homework, and it's possible I didn't put enough attention into it.
And we can go ahead and play, because you use the same cantus firmus we've been using, correct?
It's definitely the same cantus firmus. All of these are on the same cantus firmus.
All right, so just to remind us of our cantus firmus.
Lovely.
Yeah, so that was our cantus
It
firmus.
sounds very ancient.
Yes, it does.
So here's my stab at it. And again, for every one note you just heard of Matt's, you're going to hear 4 notes on my end here. Starting on the octave. Here we go. Okay, so what do you think about that, Matt?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Uh-huh.
I noticed some parallel octaves.
Oh, no.
Yeah, in measures, in the third measure, going into the fourth measure, we have and this will be up on the website. I encourage anybody to follow along.
Absolutely.
But we have an F in our cantus firmus, and our counter melody is going. So it moved up to F, an octave above the F in the cantus. And then both of those moved down to E, right? Yeah, parallel octaves. We should probably do something about that.
Yeah. Kind of a bummer, man. But we're going to make it right. I'll go ahead and play back these first few measures. We'll point out the mistake, and then we will see what we can do to fix it. So here we go. Measure 1. 2, 3. Here's that mistake. All right. We'll go ahead and fade it out. Okay, Matt, so what did we do to fix that mistake?
All I really did was move up from F instead of down.
Yeah.
And in so doing, so rather than we just continued up. Right?
Yeah. That fixed it, huh?
Yeah, and so that one was fairly easy.
Contrary motion, again, saving us. Saved by contrary motion.
Yeah, saved by contrary motion.
Okay, so let's hear what the corrected version sounds like now.
Okay.
Ah, much better.
Better, right?
Much better.
Yeah, better.
And now I have to share this with you. Initially, my intent was to do fourth species counterpoint, and I took an honest stab at it. But Matt got out his red pen, and the paper ran red from the blood of my mistakes. And even though some of it was salvageable, we decided that for the sake of time, and we would just have Matt come in and do a good fourth species counterpoint.
Well, I tell you, it is never good, and it is never productive to jump into something without knowing the rules.
Yeah,
right?
well, now I knew the rules. I don't have that excuse, but I was also kind of watching TV a little bit at the time.
Jeremy will attest to how many drafts that I've gone through
Yeah.
getting these counterpoints right. That it is not easy.
Even knowing the rules, it's not. It's because there's a lot of stuff to keep up with.
Yes, it is. It is not. It is not at all easy. So some things about fourth species. Fourth species is not a ratio thing.
Oh, yeah.
There is a 2-to-1 ratio in fourth species, just like second species. What fourth species does is introduce the idea of suspensions. See a previous podcast where notes are actually held over, tied into the next measure. And this is a specific kind of dissonance.
Yeah.
And this is a dissonance that must resolve down by step. It is the only way, we correctly handle that. So the syncopations will move from the weak beat, which is beat 3 or beat 2, depending on how you want to look at it.
I guess since we're in whole notes, we'll just say.
Yeah, since we're in whole notes, we'll call this the half note.
Yeah.
Whether you're in 4/4 or 2/2. From the weak beat of one measure to the strong beat of the following. The weak beat must be consonant. That resolution must become a consonance.
Okay.
To have resolved the dissonance at all, that note has to be consonant, right? Dissonances must be resolved. You can have a suspension on a strong beat, meaning that as the cantus firmus note under this note that's being held over moves, that can create a dissonance. So long as that note in your counter melody moves downward and becomes a consonant.
Can we hear a quick example of that? Do you mind?
Absolutely. So, let's see what. So, consonants, right? Dissonance, right? Because the cantus firmus moved, resolving downward to a consonant.
So that was cool.
That was cool.
Okay.
It sounds very specific, but it's really what it's doing is contriving that kind of motion. That kind of suspension motion where you create a dissonance by not moving a note, and then you have to resolve that note downward.
And one of the problems I ran into on my fourth species counterpoint when I was trying to write it was a lot of my motion was actually moving upward. So that did not allow for suspensions. That's all about downward resolution, right?
Right, yeah. So, and I'm pretty sure we've talked about suspensions on a previous podcast, probably the ones with the non-chord tones.
Non-chord tones.
This is exactly what we're doing. This is the counterpoint version is older. So like the regular part writing chord music theory version, even when you hear guitar players talk about a sus6 or something like that, it evolved out of this. But this is exactly what we're doing in fourth species counterpoint. It's not really as contrived as it sounds when you explain the rules. So just like that, we have a preparation. Consonants. A suspension when the consonance becomes a dissonance. And a resolution when that note that we held over resolves down.
Now we're good, huh?
Yeah.
Now we got a consonance.
Yeah. So preparation, suspension, resolution.
Nice.
Right? Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. What is a syncope? Or did I even say that right?
It's a syncopation.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just a...
It's a fancy name for the note that is syncopated.
Okay. Right. Okay. That's the note that's syncopated.
Yeah.
Killer. Yeah. So as we're saying, when you're doing these suspensions, it's good to stick with the 9/8s, the 7/6s, and the 4/3s, right?
Well, if you follow all the rules, you're going to be sticking with 9/8, 7/6s, 6/5s, and 4/3s.
By default, right?
By default, yeah.
Now, some argue that the 6/5 is not as effective because it starts off with a consonant interval.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that, or what do you think?
Maybe doesn't have as much of what they would call what Renaissance theorists might describe as tickling the ear.
Yeah.
because it is technically two consonances. And I have heard, even going into tonal harmony, I've heard theorists say that that's not a true suspension because because it's not a dissonance to a consonant. That's personally not one of those hills I've ever chosen to die on.
It's kind of, that seems to be one of those things that can be objective or,
Yeah. By the strictest rule of law, a 6/5 suspension is not truly a suspension because the interval of a sixth is not a dissonance.
Right, okay.
By the strictest rule of the law. It will behave very much like all the other true suspensions do in many instances.
Okay.
So what that little loophole means is if you find yourself with your two notes a sixth apart, you don't have to resolve that sixth down necessarily. And that can be beneficial to you.
Question. Are there any suspensions that move upwards that we can use at all? Not even the 2-3?
That is called a retardation. A 2-3 is when the bass moves.
Yeah, right, yeah, bass.
Yeah. So that is the same situation, except that it is the bass voice that's moving. So the numbers go upward instead of going down.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really a 9/8 suspension, just inverted.
So the interval's still shortening, right? Or is it?
Yeah, the interval is still shortening because the bass moves up.
Cool, very cool.
Instead of the upper voice moving down.
Got it.
And
And
now we have totally left counterpoint behind and we're talking about figure bass.
Yeah. So, but it's also kind of the exception a little bit as far as these suspensions are concerned.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, it's time for the crazy Latin word of the day.
Clausula vera?
Yeah.
I actually had to make Jeremy look this up because I didn't exactly remember.
Yeah.
Contrary to popular opinion, I don't know everything. I had heard that phrase and I completely forgot what it was. But tell him what it is, Jeremy.
Oh God. Okay. So here's a.
So saith the tone.
Yeah. So this is considered a true cadence. That is Latin for true cadence.
Clausula vera.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Basically, you have a major sixth by created by a scale degree 2 and 7, resolving to a perfect octave.
Right. One goes down and one goes up, and we have an octave.
And the bass going down and
the upper voice moving up.
Okay, well, that's kind of a letdown.
Not that big a deal, right?
It sounded way more complicated, but I'm actually...
They call it true cadence because it is sort of... They call it clausula vera true cadence because it is the strongest kind of motion you can have in counterpoint. Right?
Before we get into tonal harmony, where you had that 5/7 to 1 thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the 5/7 to 1 thing was created by taking the clausula vera and adding scale degree 5 to 1 in a bass voice.
So the clausula vera does imply a 5/7
absolutely
cadence.
Absolutely.
Great.
All our rules of tonal harmony evolved out of counterpoint. This is why we're talking about this. You know?
Oh yeah.
It's not just because I like to dork out on music theory stuff. You know?
Well, we like to dork out, but I don't think either of us like to dork out as much on counterpoint.
Not as much on this.
Maybe some other people do.
There are people that definitely dork out more than I do about it. Definitely.
Moving on, my friend.
Yeah. All right. And one last thing. Parallelisms, even the good kind, parallel thirds and parallel sixes, if you use them forever, if you're just right, you will be damaging the integrity of your line's independence.
Yeah.
You're messing with the idea that these are two different melodies when they're moving so closely together. This is parallel octaves and parallel fifths. Don't ever do it.
Yeah.
With thirds and sixes, this is okay as long as you do no more than 2 or 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Right? And also keep in mind that with fourth species, these 4/3 suspensions, amount to parallel thirds.
That can be seen as a reduction, or parallel thirds could be a reduction from what you just played.
Right, yeah. Structurally, they're still parallel thirds. This is actually the impetus behind the rule about strong beats to strong beat parallelisms in third species is because structurally you're still doing that, right?
Yeah.
In fourth species, those suspensions are still structurally thirds, or if you're using 7/6 suspensions, and there's still structurally sort of parallel sixes. So that same rule applies. Try not to do them more than 2 or 3 times in a row. Just for the sake of the integrity of your line's independence.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Just when you thought it was safe.
Just when you thought it was safe. Just when you thought it was safe. But, you'll find that that's really boring anyway. You won't like to do that.
Okay, so, and it's my understanding that you also want to avoid a chain of suspensions with 9/8 because that'll just sound like parallel octaves, correct?
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, really try to avoid that.
But in the meantime, what suspensions are our best friends?
7/6
Uh-huh.
and 4/3.
Good guys. Good guys.
Good guys, yeah. Don't do more than 2 or 3 of them in a row, but they really will help you out.
Yeah. Don't keep them around too long.
Yeah, but dole them out gradually. Between mixing 4/3 suspensions and 7/6 suspensions with your weak beats forming consonances, which you can also do, right? That can clear up most fourth species counterpoint.
Very good. All right. Without further ado,
Yes.
I suggest we listen to our fourth species counterpoint.
Let's do that.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. And, keep in mind, because we might have glossed over this a little bit, but if your weak beat, that half note that's getting tied over into the next measure, if that is consonant with your whole note that's in your cantus firmus, you can do that anywhere. If your strong beat is a consonant that isn't a dissonance that has to be resolved, then go ahead and leap to some other consonants.
Okay.
It'll help you. It'll help you.
And another thing that I think was restricting me when I was trying to do some of these, I think I was being a little bit too restrictive on my leaping. I tried to make everything work by stepwise motion.
Yeah.
And maybe it is okay to throw in a third in there every now and again or leap a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's kind of necessary.
Yeah.
I think you'll have a real hard time getting everything to work out exactly right.
And then another thing I didn't realize until after the fact is that a leap is a little more acceptable in contrary motion after a zenith.
Sure.
So what you were saying, you can step up to it and leap down, or vice versa.
Both, so long as what's surrounding it conforms to good rules about leaping. And see our previous episode on counterpoint.
Or voice leading, for that matter.
Or
right?
voice leading, for that matter. Yeah.
Lots of episodes you can listen to before this one. Saying that now that it's almost over with. Oh man. Well, I enjoyed that. That was actually really pretty.
Yeah. But, we do what we can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think it's a good time to go ahead and do a quick and modest recap, because
all
these rules, it'll take us another hour to recap all these rules.
Yeah, it's hard to recap some of this stuff.
Cliff's Notes.
Yeah.
So, we started off writing a cantus firmus.
Cantus firmus.
The fixed song.
The fixed song. The melody against which we are experimenting.
So this will be the main melody, and everything else we're going to be adding to this melody.
Yeah.
And then we went on to first species.
First species, note against note. For every note of that cantus firmus melody, we added a note in counter melody. So 1-to-1 ratio.
Right. And then second species.
Second species was 2-to-1. And in so for every note of cantus firmus, we had 2 notes of counter melody. And in doing that, we allowed ourselves passing tones and neighbor tones.
Now, I kicked myself a little, Matt, because in retrospect, I probably would have taken the first and second species counterpoint and let you deal with the third and fourth species. But
it depends. Yeah, it depends. Some people find third and fourth easier because they have more options with the dissonances and stuff.
Yeah, and ultimately what we came up with were pretty simple melodies. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's just, you would be surprised to think that all these rules contribute to making something so simple.
Yeah, well, it's a laboratory-like setting, right? We're think of it as zooming really, really close in onto some very simple musical texture, and just studying how that works. Like think of it as a biologist taking a sample from a dragonfly wing or something, and just getting in to see the very basics of how it works. Zoom all the way out and you have a Bach cantata, right?
Right. Very cool, man. So third species, let's talk about that.
Third species, again, this is a 4-to-1 ratio. right? Although from strong beat to strong beat, you should continue to avoid parallelisms. It's kind of second species-like, you know. But 4 notes for every 1 note of counterpoint, in which the first beat of every measure should be consonant. The rest can sort of be dissonant as, you know, as prescribed, as long as you're handling those dissonances properly. And then 4th species was our suspensions, where notes are held over to the next note of the cantus firmus and then resolved.
Yeah, a lot of cool things happen there.
A lot of cool things
Tension and release.
Yeah.
Based a lot on suspensions and syncopations.
Yeah, and you know, if you study tonal harmony, or even if you go back and listen to some of our podcasts on tonal harmony, you can start to see how all of that tonal harmony really evolved out of these notes of counterpoint. Really, the idea of tonal harmony and counterpoint as being 2 separate things isn't really right. Yeah, and the more you study that, the more you realize how they're really the same thing. You know, tonal harmony is just a more advanced version, in only some ways even, of counterpoint. So there you go. And of course, there's 5th species in which all of these are mixed, in which you freely mix 1st through 4th species together, and that's when you have what approaches actual music in 2 voices.
Did you see my face just turn pale when you said 5th species?
Yes.
Because I thought we're going to have part 4.
Now, we just described 5th species.
We just did all, no problem.
5th species is when you can do anything from 1 through 4.
Great, man. Okay, and then just one more time, because motion is such an important part of counterpoint.
Right.
Let's just go ahead and recap the 4 main types of motion.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Parallel.
Parallel motion is when 2 voices that are given interval apart move up or down by that interval and stay that interval apart.
Yeah, staying almost as a tethered.
Right, almost as if tethered together by that interval.
Contrary motion.
Contrary motion is when one voice moves up and the other moves down.
Okay, easy enough. Our friend is contrary motion.
It is indeed.
Similar motion.
Similar motion is when 2 notes are an interval apart, they move in the same direction, up or down, and land not that interval apart, but some interval apart.
So it's following the contour pretty closely.
Following the contour, but not exactly the way parallel motion is.
Right, so the contour of the second voice is going to be a carbon copy of the contour of the first voice in parallel motion.
And both the notes move up and land a third apart.
Right, okay. And finally, the one I had a little bit of confusion on my own end, oblique motion. Can we go ahead and give a good definition?
It's when one note doesn't move and the other one does.
So it is almost like a drone kind of effect.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. Now here, let me recount a little funny experience of my freshman year in college. I was taking a philosophy course. And not too long after the very first day of the classes, one of the students asked the Dr. Rachel's, they said, "Do you believe in God?" And Dr. Rachel said, "I'm not going to tell you that now. I'm going to wait till the very last day because I don't want it to change your opinion on me or my philosophies or my teaching of these philosophies."
Right.
So he did a good job. And then on the very last day, we're all kind of gathering around asking, "You think he's going to, what do you think he is?" "Oh, I think he's an idiot. I think he believes in God." He finally gave his answer. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But this is how I kind of felt about this episode. And I wanted to ask you, Matt.
Okay.
How do you feel about counterpoint?
How do I feel about counterpoint?
Having taught it all. More so the rules. I don't know, man.
How do I feel about the rules? Well,
what we've done so far here.
You know how I feel about rules in general.
Yeah.
You know, I don't look at theory as a giant book of rules. Counterpoint can be a little bit of a special case amongst that philosophy because what it is previous ancient composers, really, and more composers / theorists looking at it and saying, well, this is how to write music. This is what sounds good. They were doing the same thing that we theorists do today. They were looking at music that had been written, that did sound good, that they did like, and asking themselves why they liked that. So how do I feel about counterpoint? About the rules of counterpoint? They're rules just like any rules of theory are rules.
Yeah.
And if you want to write in this particular way, you should adhere to those rules.
Because otherwise you're not writing counterpoint.
Because otherwise you're not writing counterpoint. Right, yeah. But the end goal of the rules of counterpoint, just like the end goal of the rules of any type of music theory, is to understand music and how it's working better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes these rules valuable.
So the rules don't change, but since you are a composer who's not strictly a counterpoint composer,
No.
are these rules ingrained, and do you hold these in mind when you're writing some of your pieces, or have you let them go pretty much and just make your own style, you know?
That's a fascinating question.
Or have you even thought about it? Is it just something you kind of do naturally and just...
There's a certain amount of it that I do naturally.
Uh-huh.
There's a certain amount of it that I think would not sound good to me if I didn't do them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think to a certain extent they're ingrained.
Yeah.
You know?
Like you don't do a lot of parallel fifths and parallel octaves, I imagine, in your composition.
Not really.
That's not to say it's never happened, right?
It's not to say it's never happened. Or it's not to say that I wouldn't do that, you know. But, you know, yeah, they're a little ingrained, and I do at least adhere to the spirit of them. Mm-hmm. I like to think of myself as writing good music.
Yeah.
Now, you know, they're swirling around in my brain along with the good rules of tonal harmony and the good rules of 19th century form and the good, and rules of polytonality and rules of everything else. There are a few rules in there that I made up myself, for crying out loud.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, man. So you know, they're swirling around in there with a lot of other things, but
things we haven't covered up to this point.
Right, yeah. But they're in there. They're in there.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody sat down and asked me to write them a piece for, you know, 2 violas or something, you know, I think I would follow the rules of counterpoint remarkably strongly.
Yeah.
You know.
Very cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, my thoughts on counterpoint are, yeah, the result is beautiful. The result is really wonderful, and I understand where it came from, and I respect that, and I appreciate it. But man, that's the last thing that I'm doing when I'm sitting down and trying to compose. But then again, since I've been out of the School of Music, I've let go a lot of those conventions, so to speak. You know what I mean?
It gets better the more experience you have with it.
Right.
You know.
There's probably some people who listen to our counterpoint and say, oh, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
They probably have a whole lot of things that they're yelling at their podcast about because we said that, you know.
Hey, write us.
Yeah, definitely write us.
info@musicstudent101.com. Now we're going to try and provoke some people here.
Yeah. But, I mean, how do I feel about counterpoint? You know, it's a style of writing that is very beautiful and very sophisticated. And to get that level of sophistication and aesthetic beauty from that music, the rules have to be sophisticated. You know, people can scoff at the rules all they want, and then they end up writing music that's a little, you know, they end up unable to write certain styles of music without applying those rules.
Yeah,
you know,
with any legitimacy.
Yeah, and that's not me saying you didn't follow the rules. Your version of this is not legitimate. You know, it is audible to, you know, that is not what they did.
It's not personal.
Yeah, right. It's not personal.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Least favorite phrase of 2012, I think.
It is what it is.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I know that we would be remiss as theory instructors to not have mentioned counterpoint at all.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we did.
And let me just say, nobody is under any impression that this is simple or easy or uncomplex or non-frustrating. You know, it is all of those things.
But I feel like I can say with relative confidence that this might be one of the more complicated topics we cover all year.
Oh, absolutely.
And now that we've got it out of the way... the rest is cream cheese. 2018 is cream cheese. Not really.
No, it's only going to get more fun from here, folks. But don't forget these rules, because these rules inform tonal harmony.
Yes, they do. And they are important.
And they are important.
All right, well, I think that's about all we have to say about that.
And that's it, and that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah. So give us your thoughts on counterpoint. Send us your counterpoint compositions if you have them.
Indeed, we'd love to hear that.
We'll bust out the red pens.
And we'll see you next time.
hope you've enjoyed this discussion. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in an upcoming episode, let us know by emailing us at info@musicstudent101.com.